Women make up 70% of the healthcare workforce, but only 20% of its leadership. On Her Story, we'll explore the careers of bold and influential women from Silicon Valley to Capitol Hill and learn how they've overcome the odds. I'm your host, Sangela Jane, and this is Her Story, a program where we explore what's beyond the glass ceiling. Well, I'm delighted to welcome Dr. Lauren Powell, President and CEO of the Equitas and Vice President of Health Equity and Community Wellness at Takeda Pharmaceuticals. Lauren, thanks for being with us on Her Story.
Thank you so much for having me. What an honor.
So you really have just a remarkable career trajectory, which I'm excited to dig into with you today. Maybe just for some context, could you just give us a little bit of background on, exactly what the Equitas does and kind of what you do in the health equity space?
Absolutely. First, it is such a pleasure to be here. So thanks for the opportunity and great to connect with you, Sanjula. The Equitas is a niche kind of boutique consulting firm that is focused on everything health equity. Having spent time working in state government, working in federal government, now working in the private sector, I'm acutely aware as to how committed I think the healthcare industry wants to be to health equity. But when it comes down to operationalizing health equity, people are really stuck. They really just kind of are paralyzed. And the Equitas exists to move people from thinking about health equity in theory to actually operationalizing health equity. So putting that into action.
We're going to talk about the origins of your career in just a minute, but as you think about kind of from the early days of studying pre-med to what you're doing today to actually building the Equitas to also, working in the private sector, do you consider your foray into healthcare leadership accidental or intentional?
It was accidentally intentional, perhaps. So I started off pre-med. I was pre-med in undergrad. I went to Xavier University, Louisiana. And I wanted to be a doctor, but I was also really more interested in health policy. So I thought I needed an MD degree for people to take me seriously and wanting to fix the policies that surround how healthcare is like administered. As a child, I had asthma, so I was like in and out of the doctor's office and spent a lot of time just around doctors. And so, but I always intrinsically felt like there's something wrong with the way we access healthcare and the way that people are treated when they seek healthcare. But I thought I needed an MD degree in order to like foray into that area. So I was focused on that primarily for a bit. But then Hurricane Katrina hit my senior year of college, and that was completely devastating to say the least. I think people heard a lot about how Katrina impacted the city and impacted the residents, but much less was discussed about how the hurricane impacted college students. New Orleans in particular was a huge college town. And so that really impacted me a lot. And what I ended up experiencing was the social determinants of health, though I didn't know what to call it at the time, but all of the broken infrastructure that led up to not only the natural disaster, but the man-made disaster that happened thereafter are all rooted in racism, but also rooted in the social determinants of health. All of those things I didn't exactly know how to name in the moment, but they had a deep impact on me. And so I did apply to medical school twice, and I got rejected twice, which is not uncommon. But somewhere along the path, I realized maybe there's something else I should be doing. And in all that time, I'd been working in clinical research. So after I graduated from college, I ended up working in clinical research and working as a research assistant, clinical research coordinator, and eventually pursued a path that was kind of in line more with that. And that took me to grad school. And it was accidentally intentional, I guess. I think that I always had some ideas of how to fix the broken healthcare system, but I wasn't quite sure I would be a leader in this sense.
But you and I actually have a lot of parallels listening to that. So, as you know, I actually went to college down at Rice in Houston. And so, similarly, even though Hurricane Katrina didn't directly affect Houston, in that way, but there were a lot of the conversations around, the impact of public health and social determinants. So, when you thought about, okay, if I aspire to be a physician, how were you thinking about the bridge between clinical medicine and those, social determinants and disparities that you were seeing at that time?
First and foremost, I could see that there were a lot of questions being asked on the national landscape that like people could have no context for unless you were like local. For example, why didn't people leave, right? Like gosh, you knew a hurricane was coming. Like, why didn't people just pack up and leave? Well, if you were local and you actually understood the context and the fabric of New Orleans, you would know that there are a significant number of people who are impoverished and who do not own cars, right? And that they were clear. Almost, we could probably actually overlay like a redlining map and see that those things probably line up like exactly the access to transportation and historic redlining. So the areas that were most hard hit, people were not able to live their best lives in those areas to begin with. And so what I was already thinking about was why is this not a factor that's taken into consideration when people are being treated clinically? Why aren't people thinking about the fact that it's not just, can I take a medicine that will control my blood pressure, but it's the fact that I may live in a neighborhood where I can't even get fresh food, and everything I'm eating, is infused with sodium and is infused with lots of other additives that don't give me a fair chance at even being able to fight back against hypertension. And so, really wanting to think about, like, why don't we have policies that bring those bridges together, like build a bridge out of those two things?
So, as you were thinking about that systems perspective, you were also doing this clinical research. You've worked in a lot of terrific organizations. At what point did you decide, okay, I'm going to go get a PhD more on the population health side of things?
On the population health side of things, it was because of my experience working as a clinical research coordinator. I was a research assistant and a research coordinator at Johns Hopkins, the Schools of Medicine and Public Health, and Dana-Farber Cancer Institute. I worked at the National Cancer Institute at the NIH, and really interesting experiences because I was the one actually trying to speak with patients, actually trying to provide informed consent and answer their questions about research protocols and research studies. And I got to experience firsthand just how difficult it is, one, to explain scientific jargon and to help people understand what is a placebo, what does randomization mean, like how do you actually put that into layman's terms. But two, I got to feel the lack of trust in participating in a clinical research study, and not just from people of color, but from a lot of different people. And that really led me to want to study that. I wanted to figure out, like, is there a way that we can actually build better trust? Is there a way that we can increase the participation of minorities in clinical research? I was rather successful in recruiting people into my studies, and I think that had a lot to do with the fact that I was very conversational with people. I actually took time to answer their questions. It was rare to see a research assistant who was a young Black woman. And for some, and for actually quite a few, that was very comforting and actually led them to feel like, okay, maybe this is something I could trust. And that exactly is what led me into working on my PhD. So specifically, I was at the National Cancer Institute, and we had a case. Well, first, let me back up and say, people don't really realize the National Cancer Institute and the NIH, their trials are open to the whole world. So people from all over the world come to get care at the NIH. And I was overseeing about, I think, 16 or 17 clinical, like phase one oncology, like clinical trials. And we had a case of a young Black male come in, and he was about, I guess, 16 or so, and just like was playing basketball, very athletic, and was randomly diagnosed with like a very rare form of cancer. And we had a trial that was like perfect for him, but both of his parents had to consent to it because he was a minor. So the parents were really like, no, like, we're not putting our child in a clinical trial. At this time, there was really no other course of treatment. And they were very, very resistant to it, and, were not okay with it. We called in like a bioethics consult and all of these roles that I just never knew existed. I was so intrigued and also disturbed at the same time, thinking about, what would his quality of life be, right? Like, why do his parents feel this way? Certainly they're warranted to have their feelings, but all of that just really sat very heavily with me. Eventually, we were able to kind of persuade his parents, and his parents did give permission. He did go on the trial, and I think it was successful. But that entire scenario was like one microcosm of what is happening all the time. And that is what led me to apply to graduate school. Is I wanted to study those exact scenarios. I wanted to think harder about how to communicate, how to better communicate about clinical trials, and how to ultimately exude more trustworthiness out of our healthcare institutions.
I mean, that's just so powerful. And, really what you're describing is, this burgeoning field of public health. And I think what's worth noting is, I don't know what your view of it is, but I personally, there aren't a ton of PhDs in really public health areas. It's a relatively newer field. I mean, there are a lot of MPH programs. When you think about the doctorate programs, a lot of institutions have created their degree programs, with really in the last 10 years or so, some a little bit longer. And so as you think back to, you mentioned the medical school path, to then kind of switching over to more of a public health doctoral training, what was that like in terms of, did you have to convince your family and kind of explain to them, like, this is what this field is? I mean, I know I personally went through that experience where I was like, what is public health, or what is a PhD in a public health area? Actually thinking about, okay, so how do I not go build a career in this with a formal kind of education training, right? Like, how did you make that leap?
I don't know how I made that leap because because I still find myself trying to pull the words together to explain to my family like what I do. I mean, from a training perspective, I think, a PhD is a very different. You're absolutely right. So first of all, I should say I was looking for programs. I was just kind of like just skimming and kind of trying to see what's out here, because I was interested in the intersection between like clinical research and sort of population health. But most of those programs that exist are for clinicians. They're for people who have already, are a nurse or are a physician's assistant or are an actual physician. There were very few programs that are actually for someone who isn't already, have a clinical degree or credential. So those are rare. You're absolutely right. And but I'm grateful for the PhD side of my training, and I'm sure we can come back to that discussion. But I think making the leap between medicine, which is something that people like can readily understand, to a PhD, which is a degree that's recognized, but people don't really quite have an idea of like, what do you do with that? To then like public health, which was something that I, quite frankly, even though I was living through a sort of a public health emergency in Katrina, I didn't really have a frame of reference for what public health really was until I started having more exposure when I was at Hopkins, and I would like, talk to other people, talk to students, and go to lectures and just like drop in and hear about things. I was like, wow, this is a whole different career path than I knew about. And I think, that's unfortunate, and I hope that that's changing. I hope that with more leaders who are Black and brown, and who are women, and who are from Native communities, and who are from the LGBTQ plus community, from the disability community, I hope that we're changing the face of what people see public health to be, and also opening up the eyes and the realization for younger people that like this is a legitimate career path that you can travel down. I did not realize that. I did not think in pursuing my PhD that I would be where I am now. I did not quite know where I would end up. I knew that this was a topic that I was interested in. I knew very early on that I did not want to be a researcher, an academic researcher, even though everyone in my program tried to get me to be.
Yep, I had a similar experience.
I'm sure you can relate. I knew as soon as I entered academia was not for me. I actually thought I would go back and work in government, which I did, state government, but I actually thought I would go work in federal government, return to federal government after this, after my PhD, which I did not. But I think I'm still actually pulling my family along the journey with me, and with each role, perhaps providing more clarity as to what it is that I actually do.
Yeah, no, well, thank you for sharing that, because in many ways that's one of the core reasons that we started the show, Her Story, was to start highlighting, non-traditional isn't the right word, but these other career paths and routes that maybe aren't as mainstream for lack of a better word, because these are these other opportunities and burgeoning fields. So I guess with that, then kind of back to terminology for a bit. So you have been navigating these different roles at the intersection of, clinical medicine and public health. And now you're in this kind of health equity space and thinking about social determinants. I mean, there's a whole lot of things happening there. How do you think about health equity? How do you define that?
Very simply put, I think health equity is ensuring that everyone can live their best life. That's just, if I had to explain it to in layman's terms to someone who had no context or reference to public health, I would say that means ensuring that people have access to jobs, that people can pay their bills, that they can live in stable and clean housing, that they have access to food that is nutritious, that they can, experience peace and joy and have equilibrium in your mental health, and access to a doctor when you need one, and provision of the best care when you go to seek a doctor's help. I mean, I think very simply put, what we're aiming for is to ensure that the people who have the privilege to make sure that they're living their best life, that the people who don't have those resources can have that same ability, that we can all live our very best life.
I love that. It's very intuitive, and that's not a traditional definition that you would hear in the industry today. And so when you think about kind of from graduate school, then you were, doing your research in this space, you were trying to raise awareness. If I got your trajectory correct, then you went to the Virginia Department of Health after grad school. Is that right?
Yeah. So after my PhD, there's a little extra thing in there in between. So after my PhD, this is when my family was like, okay, you really need to be done with school. I was finishing my PhD, and I started researching, like, where I'm a researcher, period. So I started researching, what am I going to do after this? It was like a summer ahead of me writing my dissertation. I was in the middle of writing it a summer before I would defend it, really. And I said, what am I going to do when I graduate? I started researching. I started, doing informational interviews, reaching out to companies, trying to kind of figure out where could I fit in. And this is the interesting thing, Sanjula, because my degree was so different and so new that at the time people were like, we don't really know. So, it's a PhD, which is great. That tells us you're like a critical thinker and stuff. But if you wanted to, let's say, come into pharma, you'd still have to do like a postdoc or something, because like you've left the work world, and so you don't have as much managerial experience. And so all these things sort of came together, and I was like, this doesn't really sound like what I had in mind. It's not really exactly what I think I was, infused with these skills to do just yet. So I had this lingering, I told you I had this lingering interest in policy. So I said, I'm not going to apply to any jobs. I'm not going to apply to any postdocs. I'm going to apply to one graduate school and master's in policy, and that's it. And if I don't get in, I'll figure out what to do after that. But if I don't get in, I don't get in. This is when my family was like, okay, you're doing the most now. Like, you have the highest degree you could possibly get, and you want another one? Well, I have this interest in policy, and like, I just don't think I'm done yet. So applied to Harvard Kennedy School of Government. I applied for a mid-careers master's in public administration, which is specifically for people who've already worked a portion of their career and are wanting to either, kind of pivot or add a new skill or learn something deeper. And I applied to that, and I'm so blessed and so grateful that I got in, because I literally didn't have anything else planned. I didn't apply to any other schools. I mean, my academic mentor and advisor was just like, are you sure you want to do this? And I was like, yeah, I am. I think this is it. So thank God I got in. But so in between, my PhD and going to work for the Commonwealth of Virginia, I did a master's in public administration at Harvard. And then from there is when I went to go work as the director of the Office of Health Equity.
Wow. Well, there's a lot to unpack within that. I mean, to start, the Kennedy School is by far one of the best programs in policy. So kudos to you on that. But also kudos to you on going with your gut. And in many ways, I can relate to that fact of, where do you fit coming out of a PhD training, if you don't do the postdoc, don't do the traditional bench sciences route, or you don't go in academia, you don't like, where do you kind of go within that? And so I think there's a lot to be said about kind of that process of researching options and kind of creating your own path that maybe didn't exist, to kind of find where you fit. Curious, did that influence your decision to get the policy degree, or was it purely you chasing after just the love for policy?
It definitely did influence. I mean, I think that there is there was a perception. I hope that we're starting to change that, but there was certainly a perception that like an academic degree only transfers academic skills. But an academic degree transfers life skills, right? Critical thinking is a life skill. Analysis and research is something that can be applied to any industry you go into. So understanding data and how to collect data and how to analyze data, how to report on data, how to translate data for different audiences, that is a translatable skill. And I think, what I have really learned about myself and what I've really learned about navigating this industry is like there is a way to position and brand yourself that places your skills ahead of like just sort of the degrees you have, in a sense. Like the degrees give you credentialing, but it is the skills that are transferable.
That's so important, because I think we often fall in this trap of, it's like a checklist, right? You go get these degrees, but it's really what you make of it, and how you position it, exactly to your point. So with that said, so you graduated from the Kennedy School. How did you land in state government from there?
Sandra, everything is a story. So, I I graduated from the Kennedy School. It was so exciting, and I have to say, I think that they sometimes when you're graduating from Ivy League schools, I feel, and this is like not an experience I've ever had. So I should make it clear. I've been at an HBCU, a state school, and an Ivy League school, all of which are very different experiences. I so appreciate each one of them because they have each contributed to molding me into who I am today, and I think makes me very, very comfortable being in lots of different scenarios around lots of different types of people. But you know, I graduated, and I think like around that time, really they start to prepare you, and sometimes I think they make you feel like you're leaving Harvard, like everyone's gonna want to hire you. Well, that may be the case for white men. Let's just be honest and clear. That may be the case for white men, but I am still a Black woman, and I still have to compete for everything that I go after. So I did not necessarily find that to be the case for myself or for my colleagues who were people of color who graduated either. And I still had to very much compete for the positions I was going after. So I actually applied for positions in lots of different places. I interviewed at no, I did not interview. I applied and made it to like a first round of interviews or something for a couple of consulting firms like BCG and the top consulting firms. A social impact consulting firm. I also made it to a couple rounds into that, and I found them to be interesting but not motivating. Still not quite what I thought I would be doing. I applied for a couple of different states and actually had a couple of interviews for states in Massachusetts in particular. Applied for some positions there, and then I applied for a position in Virginia. And I put it out there. It was an Office of Health Equity. I don't remember how I found it, but I was very serious about applying for jobs and networking at this time. And I also had a very short stint of consulting right after I graduated from the Kennedy School. So I was kind of doing that and applying for jobs at the same time. And the Equitas didn't exist then, so it was just like me side hustling, independent, trying to make it until my next thing. And so I applied for all these positions. They all got whittled down eventually. And I went out of the country for a week or so with classmates. We went on a trip to Nigeria, which was beautiful. I was in Nigeria and Charlottesville happened. So I was actually watching the coverage of Charlottesville when we were in Nigeria, and we'd actually just come from I think it's the like gate of no return. So it's the area where the transatlantic slave trade, like it's one of the ports of the transatlantic slave trade. Now, the juxtaposition of the fact that I just come from, in the same day, I just come from a place that essentially originated slavery. And I'm getting CNN news alerts about Charlottesville, tiki torches and white supremacists in the same day. And this is in Virginia. So I was like, let me withdraw my application from Virginia because that's not my ministry. But I didn't. And they reached out. Once I got back, they reached out and said, we would like to talk to you. And I said, okay, well, we can talk. I'm not going to make any, promises, but we can talk. I went in for, an interview. I did a couple of phone interviews. Then I went in for an in-person interview and they were like, we want to hire you. And I was like, okay, I guess I'm going to Virginia. So that's kind of, but I was very much like, should I be doing this? This is the cradle of the Confederacy. It is not lost on me, the history that is here, the ways that Virginia, has had a very significant influence historically on the codifying of race, on slavery. There were more millionaires per capita at the height of slavery in Virginia than anywhere else in the country. So that is a deep-seated history that I really had to think, like, should I do this? But ultimately, I said, yes, I should do this. Because, one, they don't know who I am. And they don't know what I'm going to bring to this role. But two, isn't this what my ancestors died for? Isn't this what they would have wanted? Isn't this their wildest dreams? And so I said yes. And I moved to Virginia, and I'm still in Virginia. Bought a house in Virginia. So I'm here for a while to shake things up.
Wow. I mean, that's just incredible where you went from saying, well, I'm going to withdraw my application to actually, taking charge of the situation in many ways. So I know we could spend a whole hour just on this, but maybe just, very quickly, tell us a little bit about kind of what it was like then actually operationalizing some of this change from within.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, basically on the heels of all these, national and state events that were happening at the time.
Yes, there were so many events that were happening at that time. And events within state government that were very significant as well. And, it was challenging and also rewarding at the same time. It was challenging for me being young and a new leader, right? Recognizing that leadership, all the courses and all of the books, everything you want to read about leadership is wonderful until you actually have to do it, right? And then you have to figure out, what kind of leader am I? How do I, I think I was like 33 or something when I started in this position, the youngest, leader of this office, first Black woman with a PhD. Everyone before me had an MD or, no, they'd all had MDs. So, I felt like I had a lot to prove, but I also had a lot to learn about myself, how to navigate working as a supervisor over people who were old enough to be like my parents, how to work also as a supervisor with people who were like my same age, right? How to still be the personable leader that I am while still creating boundaries for discipline and boundaries, right? That to hold people accountable. So I think that was one thing that I had to navigate. I think the other was really helping people understand what health equity actually is. I spent so much of my time and so much of my role was focused on defining health equity, helping people understand this is what health equity is, this is what it isn't. Racism and addressing racism is a core and fundamental requirement for health equity work, right? If you want to skip around, and if you want to walk around the perimeter of that and you don't want to speak about it head on, and not just speak about it, but actually work to deconstruct it, you are not doing health equity work. So I think navigating spaces where I was often the only Black person in the room, in leadership tables, the only Black woman in leadership spaces, and kind of also navigating when to hold them and when to fold them, right? I am one person, and And to think that only one person could completely intercept a system that was built on oppression, that was built on white supremacy, that was built to work exclusively, really, for white men, um, is flawed, right? Like, I do think one person can make a difference. However, I'm very clear on the fact, and because of this experience, I'm very clear on the fact that it cannot only be one person, right? It has to. You have to have a movement, and you have to have support, and you have to have um, others to see that this is an important cause to champion. Otherwise, those systems that continue to grind and work perfectly will grind you up in the process as well.
I mean, I think a lot of what you're describing is a common challenge that a lot of leaders face, right? Where it's you could have all these ideas and maybe know how to fix the problem, so to speak, but you really it's about execution, it's about education and bringing people along, and you got to start there. And so, you may have this wish list and agenda of all the things you want to do, and know it'll make the difference, but you may only get one of those things done because it's the broader movement underlying it.
We did get a lot done, like during that time. We, hosted the state's first LGBTQ plus health equity symposium. We did a health equity conference and think tank and community conversations, and really pushing the agency to get outside of the four walls of of their building. So absolutely, you're right.
How did you, I mean, you are just so confident about, and realistic about the bounds of, what you can and cannot do given, the environment and the point of time. But to your point, I mean, you were the first of many in these, organizations. How did you keep yourself going through that, not seeing others around you that either look like you or thinking like you? I mean, just mentally or emotionally, what was that like?
I try to stop and think about this more because I'm actually asked this quite often, and I don't always feel like I have the best answer for it. But I've tried to think about it more, and the reality is for me, the the places that I am are where, in the positions that I have, are the things that I do, but they're not who I am, right? They are a part of who I am, but they're not solely who I am. So it's very important for me to keep the balance of having other things to do outside of just uh, kind of my 9 to 5, keeping a circle of very trusted confidants around me who will hold me accountable and will tell me if I'm doing too much, if I'm working too hard, if I'm going down the wrong path. That's so important to me. Um, but also, finding allyship and finding support where I can, right? Even in the most unlikely scenarios, there are still people who you can find who will support your cause and who will support you and who want to be allied with you, for whatever reason, right? Sometimes it's for selfish reasons because it might make them look good, but nonetheless, the support. I have found support in unlikely places in all of the positions that I have been in, and that has also kept me going. Right, that sometimes the people who I thought were in opposition of me, they weren't always. They were sometimes supportive of me in different rooms that I didn't know of, and so that has kept me going too. I think I'll be realistic though; it can be lonely, right? The phrase "it's lonely at the top." It's not just a phrase; like it's real because when you're facing certain challenges at a certain level of leadership, you can't talk to just anybody about it because there's so much context to it that only, like, this has to be leader to leader, right? Like boss to boss. We have to talk about this. So I keep, networks of people in leadership positions in lots of different industries because at the end of the day, we may not all be working on the exact same topic, but we face the same challenges, and that has helped me. And then finding mentors outside of my workplace, finding mentors outside of my industry, and talking to those who have blazed a trail, much further ahead than where I am at this point, definitely keeps me going too.
I think what's really fascinating about your background is, you've really seen a lot of these public health and health equity issues from multiple vantage points, right? So you've seen it from the government, you've seen it from small organizations, you've seen it from, large private sector organizations. I mean, you've seen all of it. What are some of the, I guess, commonalities that you've seen, from government to education to nonprofits to some of the unique differences, and kind of particularly now in your current role at, Takeda, a really large multinational pharmaceutical company, like that's a big contrast to where, some of the work that you did at the state government level. So just talk a little bit about some of those nuances.
What I think all these institutions have in common is a I think a fragility, a bit of a fragility around recognizing how racism is such a significant like factor in health equity work. I think that across the board, there's no shortage of the desire to do good. I think everyone intrinsically, there's a small percentage of people, but there who don't, right? But they're overall, like the majority of people do want to do good. The majority of workplaces want to do good. The majority of healthcare organizations want to do good. But to not recognize and to not call out and to not stand up and work to actively deconstruct the impacts of racism in all of these systems is to sabotage your desire to do good. Right. So that is something that I see across the board. Right. I think that there are some organizations that are slightly further along than others and maybe more progressive in thinking and policies. But by and large, the hesitancy and the just the fragility, there's really no other word for it, around talking about the impacts of racism, talking about the impacts of other forms of oppression as well, is something that these systems and these organizations are very uncomfortable with. And specifically how that ties directly to health equity. We can think about the critical race theory debate that's happening nationally right now, right? That somehow we should just forget about the past, that it doesn't have any bearing on where we are now. But that is totally untrue. That even goes against what America sees as being so important to our American history, right? So I think that that's something that is a form of resistance that I think I have to continue to, I don't want to say get used to, but realistically recognize that that's going to constantly be a barrier.
Underlying a lot of what you say is this idea that is, in all industries, but I think even in healthcare, we're really bad students of history, right? And history was my least favorite subject. But in some ways, the more that you understand about kind of, and, being a researcher myself too, right? You think about the trends and over time, what the progression has been, but the more you understand the context, the more insight you have to be able to kind of think about that go forward change and, what is kind of possible and not. And so I know COVID, nationally, we've been talking about this, played a big role in highlighting a lot of these disparities and gaps that we've been seeing for many years and brought a lot of that to the forefront. And I know that played a big role in kind of inspiring the formation of the Equitist. So tell us a little bit about, okay, so you've been leading this tremendous career, operationalizing this change, grassroots up through various organizations, secure a job, really busy at a multinational group, to then saying, I'm going to also start my own organization on top of everything else you're already doing. So what inspired the formation of the Equitist?
It's the epitome of doing too much, isn't it? I know, it is. I've known for a little while, I think even while I was at Harvard, because I told you right after Harvard, I had a short stint of consulting. And it was like real kind of not organized and unofficial, and I only had like one client, which was really great. But I've known for a while that I have an interest in eventually working for myself, and it was just a matter of figuring out like when would that happen. So I didn't think it would happen this soon. I'll say that first and foremost. But at the beginning of COVID, I should say, I was in a role that was not directly serving in public health. So I was actually at Time's Up. So I was working for Time's Up Healthcare. And I was a little kind of like, oh, like, why, what is with this timing, right? Like, I just left a position where I would have been like right at the helm and like helping to make decisions and all of that. And this is the moment literally that I feel like I have trained for, from population health to policy to operationalizing health equity on the ground to working with communities. I was really sad, quite frankly, about where, like, how could it be that I was not, and I was glad to still be at Time's Up, but how could it be that I wasn't where I thought I should have been for this, like, once in a lifetime emergency that I could have really helped with. So at the onset, I knew that this was going to be a really big thing. This is going to disproportionately impact communities of color, that public health leaders are going to need help as states were declaring emergency, and that ultimately they did not know, because I just worked in state government and then there was no real guidance from the federal government. This was going to fall in the hands of states. And that because I just worked in state government and specifically at a health department, I knew people aren't going to know how to operationalize health equity in this moment. So I said, I'm going to start my company. My boyfriend helped me do the paperwork. He is a serial entrepreneur, so thank God that he knew how to do everything real quickly, because I was like, I don't know, I just might have a title. That's all I can give you. So we put the paperwork together, and 2 weeks later, I got a call from a cabinet member in the governor's office in the Commonwealth of Virginia saying, like, we need your help. We need your help with health equity. We need your help. And I was like, okay. Just so happens I've just formed a new company and you can be my first client. So that's how it started. And we have been working to literally operationalize, as in at the height of COVID, worked with the Department of Emergency Management and several other agencies in Virginia to move masks and hand sanitizers to the doorsteps of the people who need it the most. We distributed over 1 million masks, over 900,000 bottles of hand sanitizer across the Commonwealth to the doorstep, not asking people to come out to an event, not asking, not just putting it somewhere and just whosoever shall come, not shipping things to localities that we're just most comfortable with, but figuring out, using data, where are those pockets where people cannot socially distance, where there are multiple people living in a household, where there are perhaps multiple underlying chronic conditions in communities, and bringing those resources to their doorstep. So been working with them for actually the duration pretty much of the emergency, as we're still working on things. But now have also shifted into working with specific clients to help operationalize and teach people what health equity actually is. And then how to think about infusing that into your organization. How do you do that in a legitimate and also sustainable way?
Wow, that is just incredible. I mean, most people during a crisis would say it's too risky to go off and do all these new things, but you just embraced the opportunity, and thank you for doing that. I mean, it's a really important kind of cause, and has great impact for our communities. I guess, what's unique about your story in many ways is, you're a founder, and a lot of entrepreneurs, when they go off to create their initiatives, whether they're co-founding or founding solo, is this idea of kind of going in full force, right? You kind of have to step away from a job, or you kind of say, I'm taking on this big risk, go kind of full on go in the deep end here. And there is this new, I don't know if it's a full on movement, but this idea that you can kind of wear multiple hats and do a lot of things. And so it's so common now for people to be investors and founders and teacher, right? Like they kind of have multiple roles, which I think is a really interesting dynamic shaping up. What was the thought process for you in terms of, you kind of hit this moment that was kind of your calling, right? These are all the things that you were seeing or working towards, where you said you always knew you kind of wanted to eventually kind of have your own consulting arm or whatever it may be, but saying that I'm going to kind of do this on top of what I was already doing, like in terms of, taking a step back. Like, how did you think about that?
I was really very fortunate working at Time's Up Healthcare, which for, your audience is an organization that is focused on equity for women in the workplace. And working at an organization like that was really divine timing, quite frankly, for the moment, because I went to our leadership and said, I'm a former state health official. I'm a nationally recognized public health leader. People are going to need my help in this moment. And I need to know if it's okay for me to consult, like if it's okay for me to help people in this moment. And they said yes, which I am just so grateful for. And really, that helped set the precedence and the foundation for me to be able to do that. to be able to do just as you said, like not have to walk away from something altogether to explore my passion. And I think what you said is right on point, that I hope this is more of a movement that people can recognize when I'm able to be, and by the way, I was very honest and transparent about this with Takeda as well. This was part of my negotiation. And I said, it's important to me that I'm able to continue to do this, because that's the only way I can bring my best self to this role and bring my entire self to this role, which that's what you want, right? So I think that, and I should also point out, I recognize that's a point of privilege, right? Everyone is not at that point in their career. And that is a point of privilege for me, and I recognize that. But I also think, I hope that this will create more of a landscape where employers can recognize you get your best employee when they can tell you everything that they're interested in and everything that they're doing. So there's that. But I think balancing is hard. It's really hard. Like, and people keep asking me, when are you, the Equitist is gonna blow up. Like, are you gonna leave Takeda? Like, I'm not going anywhere. I really, really enjoy my role at Takeda. And at the same time, I'm excited about the Equitist. I want it to grow. It doesn't have to be just me making it grow. I do have a small team of people, and I do have a managing director, and a friend who, well, she's now a friend. I didn't know her like a year and a half ago or so, but literally tracked me down and said, I'm going to help you build this. And she has stood by and like really done that. So the managing director, who's Erin Dowell, but she is such great support. So I do have a very small team, but as we expand and get more opportunities, like I definitely want the Equitist to ramp up. And I want to be in the position where once the Equitist is to a point grossing, a certain dollar amount that I'm comfortable with, then perhaps I'll step over. But I don't actually feel like I have to be the only one in charge. And I think it's a matter of mindset as well for some entrepreneurs. And by the way, I should say, entrepreneurship scares me, and it still does. Like, stepping away to do something 100% that is like not tied to an institution that's been around, that I can count on my check coming, every 2 weeks, whatever, that's scary to me. That's really because I have not seen that demonstrated, or I've not seen anyone really, really close to me operationalize that. But my boyfriend's a serial entrepreneur, and so I've gotten to see it up close, and I've become a little bit more comfortable with it, but not comfortable enough to make it 100% just yet.
So no, I mean, I think that's just such a powerful reminder, though. I don't know if it's a gender thing, but I do know, at least in kind of my own world and network, I'm talking to mentors, it's very common to see a lot of male entrepreneurs kind of dabble in multiple organizations and multiple roles. And I think there are a lot of women that I mentor also, and I've gone through this myself, where it's like you can have all these passion and interest areas, and we often try to find all, one organization or one role to try to satisfy all of that, but really that doesn't have to be the case. And so in some ways, I think your story is a reminder that we don't have to limit ourselves there. We can get really creative about finding these different outlets, and leadership really is about, knowing, how deep to go and where, and building the teams around you to carry out those visions. So thank you for sharing that. I guess as you think about, I have my view of this, but do you think about your career arc and the confidence and your ability to trailblaze forward this kind of ambiguous, undefined kind of career arc that isn't a common, path that a lot of people follow? What do you think has given kind of you your edge in your career?
I think it's a God-given ability. I think my talents come from God, and I stay close to God, and I stay close to my faith. I also stay close to my ancestors, and I think that the wisdom and the ways that so many in my family who passed away have lived their lives continues to guide me. I think my personal experience with loss, like unnecessary loss because of health inequities, because of health disparities, because of racism, like they're double-edged sword. They're both like, the thorn on my side, and like the most like hurtful source of pain. But it's also what motivates me and keeps me going, because I don't want other families to experience the losses that I have. I don't want other communities to be with this void of like wisdom and knowledge and love that they should have from people who passed away from conditions that could have been managed, from better care that they could have received, from a better life that they could have lived if we'd actually worked to create that for them. And then I also think I don't it's actually just a part of who I am, quite honestly. Like it's just a part of my DNA. I can't explain it. I do know that this is my purpose. Like I'm crystal clear on that. And it is what wakes me up in the morning and it gets me fired up.
I guess as you think back to the early days of your career, is there something that you believed early on, whether it was kind of told to you by a mentor, or family member, or just through experience that you no longer believe?
I think that the idea somehow that you like almost can't have it all. Um, I still battle with myself on that sometimes, but I really overwhelmingly um, don't believe that. And that's because I have very clear examples of the fact that you can have it all. And I guess in addition to that, I would say there was an academic advisor once who kind of saw my resume, and I would constantly want to be going after doing different things, like doing different fellowships, and just I've always done things that interest me, and I've not done them for accolades sake. I've just done them because they're interesting to me. And there was an academic advisor who kind of said, I was presenting some other opportunity, and she was like, why do you don't need to keep doing things to pad your resume. Like, why do you want to do X, Y, and Z? You've done enough things. And I was just so disturbed by that and so hurt by that. And I don't believe in padding resumes. Like, I don't believe in that. I believe in pursuing the things that interest you. And oftentimes that means other people will not understand. And it's really not your business to understand. It's not my business to have to explain it to you. It's just what I'm interested in. And so I don't believe that. And I don't tell other people that. I do not tell, aspiring public health leaders, aspiring health equity leaders, aspiring med students. I would never tell anyone that, because I know how that feels. And it can be very demoralizing that I don't go after things just for the sake of merit. I go after things because they're important and interesting to me.
Well, I think your career has just embodied exactly that spirit. So thank you for kind of really following your heart and your passion for all of what you're doing, kind of despite what, others may have told you along the way. I guess we'll wrap with one final question. I know you have many more chapters of your book to write, and really excited to continue to track your career and see where the Equitas and everything else that you do takes you. But what would be the title of your autobiography?
I'm going to stick with my gut, and I'm going to say hustle hard, because that is what I have always done. People don't, we could have so many other chapters of this discussion, because what people also don't know is, like, I have worked in so many places. I have been working since I was honestly probably like 13. And I have just been hustling ever since then. I've worked at every retail place you can imagine. I've worked in restaurants. I've had multiple jobs, 3 jobs at once to graduate from college, like multiple jobs when I had a full-time job. So hustle, like I'm hustling, but hustling for a purpose. And that I'm hustling because I hope that in the future generations won't have to hustle as hard as I am.
Oh, that's so well said and so beautiful. You are such an inspiration, Lauren. Thank you so much for being so candid and being so open about sharing your story, and really excited to see what's next for you.
It's been such a pleasure. Thank you for having me.